all you loud, proud, and everywhere in between raging sci-fi geeks. I am Lady Fatblood here. Joined with me today is my cousin, the Cranky Critic, and we are here to lull you into sleep with our 5-part series of the Star Trek film franchise in the spirit of the new Star Trek series that is coming out. Some people are looking forward to it more than others.
Star Trek Discovery.
Some are a little disappointed at some things already without even having seen it. We'll get into that later. Basically, this is going to be a 5-part structure. We're going to start off with the motion picture. Part 2 is going to be the trilogy of 2, 3, and 4, followed up by Part 3 with Star Trek 5 and 6. And Part 4 will be the Next Generation block, and we will, we have such professionalism, we will end it with the Bad Robot trilogy, which I personally am hoping ends at the trilogy, and we don't need a 4th movie. Let's just be glad what we got, okay? Let's X-Men this shit and let's just leave it where we've left it.
So grab your drink, minimize this on your window screen, and put it to the side.
Get ready to fall asleep. I mean, I'm sure it's not gonna be that great.
We're gonna get a little nerdy here.
Yeah, we're talking a lot of nerd shop here. So, on with the motion picture. Let's see what she's got.
Star Trek the Motion Picture, released in 1979. There's a huge story leading up to the beginning of this film. Star Trek, as we all know, was a famous TV show in the 1960s. Ran from 66 to 69. And, right? No, 66 to 68. So it's season 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And it was already from the beginning, from the very first pilot, a show that got second chances. And you'll find that throughout the franchise history of 50 years, no less. 50th anniversary was in 2016, just this last year. Where the primary pilot, the episode The Cage, where Jeffrey Hunter was the captain of the Enterprise. Very
different take on the captain of the Enterprise.
And it was a pilot that was seen to be too cerebral by then NBC. The heads at the studio said this show just doesn't really work. You have to remember, back in the 60s, television still was cowboys and Indians and your nighttime serials where your family would get next to the TV and you dress up like your favorite character, the good guys or the bad guys, and it was a lot of easy cartoon marketing back then.
And we absolutely, in the 60s, were not ready for a stern-faced brunette who wore pants that was the second command of the ship.
Absolutely.
Being a female, which I find one of the biggest losses personally for Star Trek, because it would not be until 1986, in the beginning of the voyage home, where we would see our first female captain in the Star Trek universe.
That's very true, very true.
Yeah.
Good touch there. There's a lot of connectivity in the history of Star Trek that where it pushed boundaries, it changed things. The TV show was known for the original interracial kiss on television.
A little bit dub-con there, but hey, you know, what are you going to do?
But that's what the show did. The show was able to take political views and current scenarios and place them onto TV where they were in a science fiction environment where it basically got under the rating system. It snuck itself in by approaching it from a different angle. And so therefore Star Trek was always seen as a very cerebral show, a show that was hitting some marks with some very important moral stories, but using a medium such as home television to tell those stories. The show didn't do very well in the ratings. The 3rd season had its budget cut, which we all know, and the 3rd season brings in a lot of the cheesiness that has been associated with the original Desilu TV show, if you want to call it that. But what ended up happening, and making a long story short, when the show was canceled in '68, what happened in 1969? Man landed on the moon. Suddenly, the interest of space travel over the entire planet just immediately became important and popular. Everybody was screaming to go find science fiction shows on television, something about space. There was nothing on TV about space, but what wonderful show was in reruns at the time? Star Trek. So here comes 1969, 1970s, and Star Trek now is the show that everybody at home is watching, but they're not making any more new episodes. They got 79 episodes, they got canceled a little early, and the studio put it into syndication and gave them a rerun time slot, and therefore now they're super popular. beginning the convention era, where fans would start having conventions, having the Star Trek cast to meet personally. We all know that stuff, right?
Nerds.
Nerds. But we are all nerds, are we not? And so, coming into the 1970 era, what major film came out in good old 1977? Star Wars. Star Wars. It is a part of the story here, folks.
The movie and franchise that would sadly forever and always overshadow Star Trek, which it's understandable why it happened. It's just for those of us who love Star Trek and who, I personally, I know you did not.
Well,
I grew up on Star Trek, believe it or not. I remember the days where this
I
little
was the
fella...
little 1980s kid with Star Wars toys.
I remember watching Star Trek 4 and him coming over and being like, what is this? This is stupid! And I had never seen Star Wars at the time, so, you know, it happens. But unfortunately, Star Wars...
is the moneymaker that it is. It's the toy maker that it is.
Absolutely.
And it's geared for that audience. It's focused for that audience, and it works.
Very general
We all know that
audience.
it works.
Yes.
It's a general audience that anybody can accept and approach and come into, where Star Trek will have a lot of different variances in its storytelling. Because of, not only because of the wide range of directors, and television is able to be a different medium. Television from the 60s, then on the 80s and 90s was extremely different, and we'll talk about some more of that later. But the fact remained that Star Wars became a big budget sci-fi film that made a ton of money for Fox Studios in 1977. And so here comes the interest of Star Trek. Star Trek in the 70s was this on television thing, and fans wanted to have them come back because it was very popular at that time. There were, back before digital media, there were people writing letters to the studio, writing letters to the actors, can we get you back on screen? So Paramount Studios took the advantage of having science fiction at the forefront of movie making and big money at that decade, at that time. And therefore they went to create Star Trek Phase 2, which was a TV series that bring back the original cast. And it was already in set production, it was already in casting production in those phases, and it was already creating scripts. I think they had 6 or 8 scripts at the time already ready to go and already starting to prep for filming.
Adding new characters along with the old.
Correct, and there was a new actor who was going to come in and play a Vulcan named Zahn, and they were going to just try to recreate the 1960s show. There are some footage out there and some behind-the-scenes DVDs and Blu-rays where it just looked a little too 70s. It had a 70s flair to it. But another interesting aspect is how this story goes on. If you ever watch Star Trek The Next Generation and how much it connects to Phase 2 and the motion picture, it's really, really interesting. We'll get to that again later too. But Phase 2 was in the beginning phases, and the studio said, freeze, stop, halt. We are taking this production of the TV show, canceling the TV show, and we're bumping it up to a theatrical film. Which, of course, did one of two things. We, as Paramount would say, have a product just like Star Wars, and we could bring out a product with the top-level special effects, the top-level, Star Wars entertainment that they were looking for to try to garner that big budget money that big money that would come in from those films. So Star Trek the Motion Picture, here's the VHS of it, by the way.
Widescreen,
and
baby.
Widescreen. There are lovely words on the back which read, the film is presented in letterbox format. The black bars at the top and the bottom of your screen are normal. Yes, folks, this is 94 when this cassette came out.
Oh, man.
Nobody knew what widescreen or letterbox meant. They all thought the picture was being cut off. But that's another story for another day.
That's the whole other video rant.
So, Star Trek the Motion Picture was bumped up to a big budget film, and there was just a lot going on. They said, what do we have that we can already keep moving? The time frame on the film was really tight, so there were a lot of changes going on. First off, it was the fans out there in the convention world, they really wanted to see this cast return. The original pilot episode is about bringing the cast back together. Then there's an episode that has this creature that's coming to Earth, which they decided to use for the film, and they just basically took that plot of that episode and expanded it to a full theatrical story. So when you watch this movie, and there's a lot of headaches with it, there are problems with it because from many different angles. It's loved by many, but it's also seen as a big budget failure. I compare it similar to Waterworld, 1995, where you have a film that goes way over budget. The studio's trying to cut and trim that budget with a lot of production problems, and what you end up getting in the end is kind of focused to a specific group. It's not very a wide audience movie, although marketed always, of course, as a wide audience film, trying to get a lot of people.
Trying very hard and unfortunately not succeeding, as a lot of people will call Star Trek, the first film, Star Trek: The Motionless Picture.
So, what I like to do as the cranky critic is I like to see all aspects of the film. I like to look at things from an opposite direction, and you'll see that the public may see this film as a failure, but what did it do right? What did it succeed in? I think it had an interesting story for the time. I think it had the characters. The challenges came from the studio choosing a director that was a well-known classic 50s sci-fi director.
And it shows.
And it shows.
The pacing.
Now, that's the point. The point is, for some of you who've never watched Star Trek before, and you watch this film first, you are just going to go in the wrong direction the first time out. This film was made for the fans who were waiting for Star Trek to return after 10 years of being off the air. This was a film that was not only trying to encompass a TV show element with a cast of 7 and bring it into a theatrical story, but also returning all the cast like a TV show would. It would then go on an adventure like a TV show would, and then still cliffhang like it could continue on for more. You'll notice right off the bat that when you start the film, whether it be the original version, which you could find on Blu-ray today. Do we have that Blu-ray here? No, we don't.
No.
I think it's behind us back there. But the Blu-ray today, for high-definition monitors, is the actual theatrical version of the film, which has a lot of troubles. There are 3 versions that are out there. There's the theatrical version. There's an old pan and scan, I believe, VHS version, which is a special edition, right?
I
Is
think
that
so.
what they called it?
I think so.
It was like a home video version with like 15 minutes or 10 minutes of extra footage, which in fact one of the behind-the-scenes footages that they cut into the film shows half the set of the Enterprise. It was, something again trying to give you more to sell a product. And then there's also out there, if you are lucky enough to find it, we're in a little tight in space, is Star Trek: The Motion Picture, the Director's Edition, which was released in 2001. And what this was is on DVD format only, because the effects were upgraded in some shots. They added effect shots, and they trimmed out some things in the film that just were a little, what do you want to say? Well, trim the fat, basically.
Yeah.
It was rearranging some shots, trimming some of the unnecessary dialogue that was in the movie to help make the movie seem more cohesive. Something that stands out, we haven't gotten into the story of the movie yet, but something that stands out is that in the film you never ever see a full shot of the V'ger spaceship. And you only see bits and pieces of it in the theatrical version, because they were only built in bits and pieces as large model sequences that the camera would fly over. Well, in this version they create CG version of the actual full ship coming out of the cloud, trying to make it more cohesive and understanding for a new audience. If you were to see the movie for the first time, I suggest this version. Robert Wise, who was the director, did get his blessing for this film, for the people who made this re-edit version. But this is very hard to find these days, and is never ever going to be in Blu-ray, because when the effects were done for 2001, that's 480p, that's DVD quality, and those digital effects can never be upgraded to a higher quality. When you have film, emulsion can always be upgraded to high definition or higher definition. So that's where the theatrical version of the film will live on. Saying that with the 3 versions, each version gives you a different feel because of the choice of scenes that they have. But otherwise, fandom world will say there were errors in the film because you have a director who's just making a movie on his own. And another world will say, well, I like the theatrical version because it's not chopped up and feels more modern. I like the 70s classic feel. There's a robotic computer in the film who talks, and it's supposed to be the ship talking back to you. And in the original theatrical version, it can get a little annoying because it's just monotonous talk. The ship is on red alert, and and every time a person's talking, the computer is talking back, yes, stand by, and it's like, it could have been done in a more efficient way, but they didn't see that in the 70s. But
Definitely.
the 70s are what it is. So if you like the 70s look, you like 70s sci-fi, this is 70s sci-fi with a 50s flair to it.
Something you'll notice in a lot of 70s films, almost without fail, is everything was ugly in the 70s. The cars were ugly, the clothing was ugly, the hairstyle was ugly. Films tended to be ugly.
Gritty.
They were gritty, they were just not very attractive to look at. You did not watch a film in the 70s for its breathtaking color palettes and scenic schemes, or whatever you want to call it. But you know, Star Trek is one of those films. The motion picture, getting into what I feel that the movie did right, where a lot of people are quick to criticize, and I completely understand with how slow the film is. The pacing is at a snail's crawl. The acting is very stilted. It's amazing what a difference a director makes when you see the jump in performances from the motion picture to Star Trek 2. And the characters are themselves feel stilted.
Yeah.
And you could chalk a lot of that up to, well, in the movie's time and in real time, we hadn't been together in 10 years, and so yeah, everybody's a little different, and everybody hasn't really worked with each other and whatnot. But still, everybody feels a little. Something's not quite right.
I think that comes down to the director's choices of how he wanted the film to look, his vision of the film, and where Roddenberry was involved with just this film. I think he was what? He was producer for this one. He never produced a Star Trek film after this. He was executive producer, or he was like in a consultant phase. Where Gene Roddenberry truly gave something to this film was more true into the originality of Star Trek, of exploration.
And that, moving into that, is what I feel the movie did very, very well.
Correct.
If you want a cerebral sci-fi film, this movie is probably the best representation of that, of all of the Star Trek films. In terms of science fiction exploration, and that includes traveling in space, of course, but also the philosophical nature of man and machine. In this film, we have a Voyager satellite that was sent off into space. What this have been in the 80s? It would have been sent off, they said?
Well, they didn't give a date.
They didn't give a date? Okay. So the Voyager 6 is sent off in some point in time.
Spoiler.
Before all of this, as if anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what you basically find out is that it comes across this civilization of other living machines, not the Borg, believe it or not, and it gains a consciousness, and it gains this...
It amasses enough knowledge is what they use.
Yes, and it wants to now find its creator, not realizing that its creator is not only human, but long since dead. And how does the Voyager / Voyager 6 satellite reconcile that? Well, we've got the character of Ilea, who is introduced in this film, and only in this film, and the commander, well, he's Captain Decker, but he gets demoted, but not really, to a Commander Decker, and they have this odd little past relationship that doesn't really mean a whole lot, but it kind of does. And he basically merges with the Voyager merges with Commander Decker, a human, and a former human named Ilea. And it's a very interesting theme on its own, and you can kind of see how it probably would have been more succinct in a TV series episode.
And it left questions.
Yes, but...
which movies don't normally need to do.
When you think about what is science fiction, this movie kind of...
nails it.
Gives you that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably its strongest suit, is the story, even though it's not executed as well as it could have
And
been.
that's the most interesting part, I think, to this whole movie. This movie is set up as an exploration film that gives you questions. Throughout the film, it's designed, here's another element, but it turns into another question. What is this? Who is the creator? Why? Who is Voyager? Who is this? What are you trying to do? And you see it from a point of view on your second time watching it. You kind of go, I get it. So therefore, the movie, like Waterworld, leads up to a build-up to an ending. An ending that you're trying to see if it will be successful or satisfactory. And I think the ending to the motion picture is absolutely satisfactory. It gives a twist on what is human exploration doing and what could potentially happen to human exploration if something like this were to happen. Where we just see in this form of a film is a menace coming to destroy Earth. As human beings, we only see this is destroying everything in its path, and it's coming straight for us.
Why is it every time we come across something we don't understand, we call it a thing?
Yeah. Bones still gives some good lines.
Absolutely.
Now, is it throughout the whole film? No, but
No.
if you look for it, for characterization, it's in there.
It is.
And there are things that even this movie start that resonate throughout the entire Star Trek franchise. Not only the beginning, where I would talk about Act 1 of the film, where William Shatner as Captain Kirk is, or I should say as Admiral Kirk, is doing anything he can to get back into that captain's chair. You see him with Decker fighting with the emotions of, why are you here? You're here because the powers that be have more confidence in you than with me, because they're all afraid. Now, in today's movie, if you were to make this movie today, it would be made a very different way. But the story could still hold up because you would show different things. You would show the torment or the challenges of what the public was feeling because of a big menace or destructive force coming straight for you at a planet that you can't do anything about. This movie gives an awe and a feeling of big and budget and, I'm not going to say excitement, but I'm going to say just wonder. Watching it in 2017, yes, get that away.
Seriously.
Watching it in 2017 is not going to give you that feeling.
No.
Not unless, I would say, you go for the musical, theatrical experience. Because Jerry Goldsmith's score for this, the man, the myth, the legend, the unsung hero of any film.
Of this franchise.
Exactly. And we, of course, had our experiences with Jerry Goldsmith's scores as we grew up.
As we did with the motion picture in Star Trek V.
Yeah, absolutely. But he really resonates a score that brings the film together as a whole. And I can watch the movie now today and see it from a different light than I saw it 20, 25 years ago.
Whereas the first time I watched it, I fell asleep.
We were falling asleep. We were bored just like everybody else is, because you didn't give the film a chance to see where it really shined and what it really was trying to do.
And especially like so many other people, like you and I both, that was probably maybe the fourth or fifth Star Trek film we had seen.
Yeah,
We had already
correct.
seen 2, 3, 4, 6.
Another film had brought us into the franchise.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we're going back to try to reconnect and see what else has happened, and we're like kind of wondering what works and what's not, and the movie seems to not be working too well. Well, you get, and again in the first act of the film is a very slow pace because it's trying to introduce characters. Like, the characters have been somewhere else since we last saw them in the original series, and then they're now coming back together. And it takes a good 45 minutes for that to happen. 45 minutes. Now that's for a film with very little action. They do an action sequence at the beginning. Now, of course, old optical effects. You got models. You got different ways of making things. No computerized stuff back then in 1979. But, I mean, one thing that's interesting and why you want to focus on the composer is notice this film starts apace with an overture.
With one of my favorite themes in Star Trek history.
And it's not really necessarily a song you're going to say, this is Star Trek when I hear it. It's just a theme of music. The music carries the film. And how many movies since 1979 have had an overture?
Yeah, not too
Now,
many.
what is an overture? And some of you don't understand. Well, there were films back in the 40s and the 50s where the audiences back then were still getting out of the radio era. The radio era, the audiences back then were very audible and less visual. You were using your mind to create the pictures of what you were hearing on a radio TV show, whether it was a soap opera, where soap operas began. People would sit around the radio and listen to radios. In film, as the audience adjusted and changed, they still had musical overtures before you even started the film. Credits were at the beginning of a movie. You know, we've seen many of those with our
Yes.
grandfather and things
Yep.
of that nature. And some of the films he still watched to the day he passed away. And you just look at it and go, wow, I see Star Trek the motion picture in this. And again, where Robert Wise in his classic science fiction direction, he starts with an overture. Everybody is looking at a black screen go, where's the picture? Is something wrong with the movie? Is something wrong with the TV? That's just today's audience.
Okay, now refresh my memory because it's been a while. The Pan and Scan extended edition, special edition that I had of the motion picture had the overture with space.
Wrong. That's this one.
Is it that one?
This one did it. This one re-edited the title sequence completely without the white lettering and the straight cuts. This one put the Starfield on it.
During the overture.
During the overture, and they put a Starfield during the title. The only difference they did is the overture, the Starfield goes away, and the title of the Starfield comes at you. The original version, complete black screen.
Okay.
The Blu-ray is complete black screen.
Okay.
And I think what the director's edition did, they also did the full song of the soundtrack. The theatrical version was a short edited version of the song.
Oh,
so it's even
okay.
longer on the director's edition. It's the full
theme.
song.
Okay.
And so there's just little nitpicks right there, being a Star Trek fan and going into that theatrical kind of portion of it. But again, the motion picture, the director's edition, tried to just entertain you a little bit more, giving you more of a fade in and a fade out with a cross wipe with the credits rather than the 1970s, just straight cut. It was boring, black screen with white letters on it. It was just literally done, the music was carrying it. But even you get the oh no music with V'ger, and that was really kind of fun. Now, if you haven't seen the film and you're trying to understand what V'ger is, she kind of told you the end of the story, which has a reveal moment in the film. The creature itself, which is this cloud coming to Earth and destroying everything in its path, calls itself V'ger, the letter V / or I would say what is it, a colon? I don't know what colon, but an apostrophe, G-E-R, V'ger, or V-E-G-U-R. That's how sometimes they spelled it.
Was it V-G-E?
Yeah, because in the end, when they finally go to the core of this ship and they get inside, they find this satellite, this Earth-built satellite on this platform, and they go up to the panel, and it's got the letter V, and then there's this black smudging of space debris smudge in the center, and the letters G-E-R, and he goes, V'ger. So the creatures read the language and gave it its name V'ger. But being a robotic language without the logic or the emotional connection and the ability to figure things out beyond logic, which is like what all Star Trek is about, it doesn't understand that those missing space there is just black smudge that you wipe off, and it exposes the word Voyager. And so, yes, the Voyager 6 probe never existed. That is not a probe that ever existed in real life. Voyager, I think 1 and 2 or whatever, were sent into space many years ago, back in the 70s. And this was a play on of sci-fi where if we continued our voyages, it was the 6th one that actually found this black hole and emerged on the other side of the galaxy, finding this alien race that found it like themselves, built the ship for it to complete its mission, because what is a satellite's mission? Learn all that is learnable, return that to Earth. And so therefore, basically, this creature returns to Earth and trying to find its creator, believing that it's an entity of sentience being. It talks about carbon-based life forms, humans, as not being true life forms. You see, where watching the movie a second time, now you get it and you understand what the conflict is here. It's the conflict between man and machine. And then, of course, the machine being the true invalid, because it's man-made, but yet the machine believes it's superior because of what it knows. And so, philosophical, way too cerebral, very much like the first Cage episode with the original series, and why they got a second pilot, which is very unheard of, because the studio allowed them to do it again and make it a more action-packed with William Shatner and the Kane we know today, because that's what was greenlighted, where the first film is the very same thing. So Gene Roddenberry, you look at his vision, his style, what he wants out of the film and the TV show, and you look at what does work and what doesn't work. Hence the movie. Why do you go to the next movie? They didn't bring him in on it. They brought in a new producer.
And for better or for worse, that's just the way it was. And personally, I appreciate what Roddenberry brought to the table, and I appreciate the motion picture, but there were mistakes made. And if you wanted to get a broader audience, but at the same time maintain the Star Trek integrity of what Star Trek is and is not. Star Trek is not an action thrill a minute space romp. It is a voyage.
Correct.
And it is a space exploration, human condition, story-based series and franchise. But it's a fine line that you have to toe to get people to come in and watch, but at the same time keep people in the seats and not having them walk out of total boredom, which unfortunately the motion picture did not succeed in.
Correct.
And where it was a little sad that Roddenberry kind of got pushed out a little bit. I think it was a necessity, because it led to one of the greatest Star Trek films in the history of Trek, in my humble opinion, and probably my favorite film of all time. So on that note, you want to go ahead and cut this off?
No, there's still a whole lot more to talk about.
Seriously.
My thoughts are too, are that with the motion picture in its place and where it is, I don't like to compare it so much to Star Wars, but this is almost a similar analogy where you have George Lucas and Gene Roddenberry. They created this vision and this idea, but of course, through production, through audience connection, things change and adjust. Because some things work and some things don't. Ultimately, these are made to make money, and that's where it's going to be driven. But look at George Lucas's failures that he's had in the past. Everybody can opinionize on that, where that goes. But the things they don't like that will never ever return because, well, we tested this water and it didn't work. Star Trek has the same thing. You'll see where different producers have come throughout the Star Trek franchise, and where Gene Roddenberry was involved mostly in the original series. He was involved in the first film, the motion picture, and he was involved in the creation of characterizations for the Next Generation. A lot of similarities there, and I think there's a spark somewhere. Why Next Generation succeeded? Because Roddenberry really has a connection on characters and how they can conflict with each other. Something different from the Rick Berman era, where Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, they can still create good stories, but you'll see that it never really, produced the same exact wide global connection. Star Trek the Motion Picture started a franchise going in from a television franchise to a theatrical franchise. What also happened was, now, Industrial Light and Magic did not do this film. Industrial Light and Magic came in with Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Because what ended up happening in the early 80s was the Star Wars films were complete, and the franchise quality special effects that Star Wars had created, they created a big budget company with ILM, and they decided to go into the Star Trek era for a while. Star Trek became a little more action oriented through its films because of what ILM could bring to the table, the quality of what their effects and their optical effects were doing in the early 80s and all the way into the 90s. But the fact is, you were right, Star Trek, the TV show, had some action in it. Did it always require action? No. It mostly was character driven. And in a theatrical film, where are your characters going to have time to grow? You're going to see that as we talk about some of the other Star Trek films as well. You're going to almost feel like you have to have seen the films before it. Where in the world of television, old television, by the way, Star Trek, that's Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, well, not so much Deep Space Nine, but serialized TV was about, you could jump in on any episode and you didn't need to know the episode prior. Where the motion picture almost wants you to have known a little bit, because it's about a reunion. It's a reunion movie where you need to almost have these characters and understand them just a tad bit before you go into it. The film does do some speak about, it's all how we feel, Mr. Spock, trying to tell those new people, he's emotionless. That's why he looks like a statue standing in the turboway. That's why he looks so angry and frustrated. But no, the fact is there is an element to a theater that you have to change, that you can't do with television. And, the Star Trek franchise always hurt from that. How can you make a movie that somebody who's just walking off the street can walk in and see it? And there it is. It comes down to what the motion picture did. It created a bunch of sets. It created and set the bar very high. It brought back a franchise that was gone for 10 years, that had only lived in an animated series in the mid-'70s, because everybody really wanted it, but it just wasn't coming together. Productions will teach you a lot more about a film, and this is what the cranky critic likes to do. I'm cranky about everything. Always looking at the opposite side of the coin, if you want to say it. It's about a film could be successful if you look at it from how it was created, because you'll see its failures. And we'll talk about another film in the Star Trek franchise here soon that is known as the ultimate Star Trek failure. And you'll find that where, even though the motion picture and that one seem like they're the lowballs in the franchise, you'll see something different. This one, the motion picture, was a production nightmare and adjustments throughout production. Where the other Star Trek film we'll talk about was Star Trek V, the Final Frontier, where it was a production failure of over budget, uses and not being able to complete the film that you originally set out to complete. And therefore, you end up with a different product and a more challenging product to work with. Looking at how productions complete, how a movie begins from beginning to the end, that's when you'll learn why a movie has its problems. And I think the motion picture shows a lot about going too big, too far, too fast. And it was trying to rush it out to get the Star Wars connection, and it didn't work. But it makes a ton of money.
Yeah.
And so therefore you get alternate editions
Yeah.
and re-releases that Star Trek V is not going to get.
No.
Because to the studio, this was a success.
Right. Where it mattered.
Because money matters.
Yes.
It made a lot of money for the time, and it just still lives on as one of those classic films in their library. So there are some other things out there. If you have some interest in Star Trek, the motion picture, we have a VHS version of the copy. There is the director's edition, and there are a couple of soundtracks out there. I used to have this on cassette, but this is the Columbia Legacy copy of the soundtrack, which is a 2-disc CD. It is primarily the original soundtrack and a lot of behind-the-scenes interviews with Gene Roddenberry. Very cool CD. If you can't find that one, it's very cool. This one was I want to say 3-disc. Is it 3? Yes, 3-disc copy from La La Land, right? Yes, this is La La Land, the limited edition of Star Trek The Motion Picture soundtrack. Lots of extra stuff there, really cool. Lots of original cues and alternates. And I'll show you, let you show that one. They also have the wonderful LP, if you're an LP fan. La La Land Records, definitely want to give them a check. It's LALALAND, I think .com. But cool soundtracks. They're in very limited edition. Definitely go get them if you love it. I think if you like scores, Star Trek The Motion Picture is definitely a movie for you. Be prepared. There are sequences in this film, I think at least 3 times, where there is a 5-minute sequence of just music and facial expressions.
Yeah. And I get it. I get the hate, but I also get what they were trying to do, and I think that's what this movie has come to kind of mean to me over the last decade or two. Because again, when I first saw this was the movie that I would not watch.
Correct.
When I would have a Star Trek.
And I remember that era of ourselves too.
Yeah.
We always felt that Jerry Goldsmith just got the crappy films.
Yeah.
And because we saw the film face value,
we didn't even appreciate his scores.
thank you. We always loved the other films, 2, 3, 4, 6, and we
Yeah.
said these are the movie scores that are representing the terrible
They're
films.
also not the scores that you would go to listen to if you ever wanted to listen to Star Trek.
Which now here we are 20 years later,
How wrong we were.
and I am only listening to these, and I'm not listening to the James Horner anymore much longer. When I get into it, yes, I do. But the fact is there is something about this guy that we lost him way too soon. For those of you in the Star Wars franchise, I'm a composer guy. I love stuff. John Williams was my start, and I loved him since Jaws, and I still love Jaws. But you're lucky to still have him, and I hope he makes it to 9, because that is now one of the main reasons I still go see those films, even though they are Disney owned and operated, if you want to call it that. But that music has a flair to it. This started a song that still is synonymous to Star Trek today. And many people, even though they're Next Generation fans, go, well, that was the Next Generation theme. Well, wrong. It was the motion picture theme.
Not.
And there were alternates. That theme wasn't the original theme. Another challenge to the movie was the movie was not finished filming, and they already had to write the score to the movie. And again, the film was making songs to an unedited piece of film. So that's where you'll see that the music really drags on long. For me, I now love it, because here we go to another musical sequence where we get some visuals.
And it is visual storytelling.
It is.
It can be very boring if you're not accustomed to it, but it is all visual. Like when you're going, one of my favorite pieces of music from this is The Cloud.
Absolutely.
Where they first go into the cloud and they're exploring the V'ger cloud. And the reason you're getting all these reactions is because when they go into this thing, they're seeing all these things that they've never seen before. And it's telling you a story of what this cloud has been devouring and what it has been living through and seeing, and
It's exploration.
Exactly.
And the movie is about the wow and wonderment of that beauty, and therefore they tried to use the effects to bring that to the audience. Did it succeed completely? Maybe, maybe not. but maybe only to the trained eye. The person who's expecting that. If you've watched it, you know what you're going in to see, you can rewatch it with some value. If you're looking for an action piece like the latest Bad Robot films, you're not going to feel it. You need to go into those stories as characters. It's almost like, why would anyone still watch the original Star Trek TV show today? Even though they've done a Blu-ray and DVD version with updated special effects to clean it up a little bit. But you don't go to Star Trek, the original series, for the special effects. You're not there for anything but stock footage. Stock footage, what the hell is that today? There's no film that uses stock footage. Well, okay, I've seen some films use it for some purpose and reasons. But the reality is in Star Trek 2, half the footage of the entire first half of the film is still the motion picture. You know, again, cutting budgets, things of that nature. It was a use and a tool that you could use and tell a different story. The fact is with the motion picture, it showed a lot of potential. It tried to give a direction, and ultimately it was about the characters, even though it may have been slow. But a good thing I like about slow is that it allows you to dive in a little bit longer. You don't get through a dialogue sequence in 10 to 15 seconds. You get through a dialogue sequence in 2 minutes. And you understand it a little bit more. Star Trek, the original TV series, you're in it for the characters. What the characters are going to do, the banter between the three, McCoy, Spock, and Kirk.
The Trinity.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
And when we get to Star Trek V, that's where Star Trek V succeeds. It doesn't succeed anywhere else, except for that little tidbit. For the fans, maybe. Because people who aren't fans, who didn't see the film before or didn't see the TV show before, it's tough to approach. And that's where I think it made it hard for the world to accept Star Trek, because it became a niche group. And it was trying to maintain that niche group. And I understand completely when J.J. Abrams said, we got to make Star Wars a little more like Star Trek, a little more like Star Wars, sorry. I get that.
Yeah.
Even though I don't want that, I get it. It's because the films were all about maintaining the audience, not bringing in a new audience. When you get to Star Trek Discovery here pretty soon, coming up soon, we haven't seen it yet. This film is filmed before that show is released. It's going to be the same thing. You're going to get something new that's not the old, but it's trying to marry the two together. We'll see how successful that is.
So,
the motion picture. We never have to do this video again, right?
Jesus. Right? I warned you all. Okay, so that is that. Now, is that concluding our first
You know what?
part?
Put in the comments below. I'd like to see what you have to say, because everybody sees a movie different ways.
They do.
And that's the point. And if you're a new person who's trying to come into Star Trek because maybe Star Trek Discovery is the show that interests you, because you've seen the Bad Robot films and you don't really know what you're getting into, if you want to know a little more, write it in the comments below. I'll write back. Why not?
He'll write back. All right, so thank you for indulging us in this snorefest of a video of the first part of our Star Trek, the film franchise discussion. We will be seeing you again for the second volume, which will be the trilogy of Star Trek 2, 3, and 4. And we will see you then.
Share, subscribe. Like, share, subscribe.
And the studio stopped them just before.
You.
Sorry.
You are fired.
Just restart where you.
And so the studio came back and they tried to create a second TV series called Star Trek Phase 2.
God damn it, I'm sorry.
That samurai guy suddenly came going, Star Wars is the best, man.
Okay, alright, that's it. It's on there. It's on mute.
Shit.
Okay, start.
You, sir, such unprofessionalism.